why you can be fine at work, but you can have social anxiety outside of work. And by outside of work, I mean you're hanging out with your coworkers or the same people you do at work, like at a party. And the reason is very simple. It's that your perception of being social at work is different than being social outside of work. At work, you're just, expected to do your job. You know what to do. It's usual. You know what to talk about. You always know what to talk about. You know what's appropriate because it's always, you can always go to work. You can always talk about work. And you're good at talking about work because, you've done you know how to do your job. You know what to say about the things that, you're working on. And you don't feel pressure to be interesting or to talk a lot or to keep the conversation going because, hey, everybody's busy. They want to get their work done. And work in general is a boring topic to most people. So it's not like there's it's not like you're thinking, oh God, I don't know how to make this project sound interesting. What do I say about, this project now? I there's nothing else to talk about. If there's nothing else to talk about, then, it's work. Just, you can always just say, I'm busy. Or, like, you can say, all right, I'm going to get back to work, and that's just an acceptable thing to do in your mind, right? That's just how work is. And then you think being busy itself, and the key here word is think, that being busy is an acceptable excuse for not interacting or getting out of an interaction. And it's true. That is, in today's society, an acceptable excuse. But if you did not think that it was an acceptable excuse, then it wouldn't be, and you would have social anxiety for trying to get out of an interaction or for interacting. Right? And the only reason that this is an acceptable excuse is, one, it really is, and two, the most important part, is that you think it is. Now, with that said, let's talk about, I want you to keep that in mind as I'm going through the outside of work situation, why the social aspect is different, and how thinking about this in a different way will free up the pressure, will free up the pressure to talk, the pressure to be interesting, the pressure to be a good host, right? All that goes away once you think this X excuse. For example, if you're tired, right, Diane, you were tired, and you're not, anybody who's tired can't function that well, obviously, because you're freaking tired. But for some reason, you think that being tired, you can't, that's not an acceptable reason for not talking much, even though that is just as acceptable, if not more, than being busy when you're at work, right? They're both acceptable, and the only reason that you think they aren't is because the only reason that you think being silent and not talking much equals you gotta drink a Red Bull. The only reason that happens is because you don't think that by telling someone I'm tired, if you don't say much, if somebody talks and you're tired and you forgot what they said really, then you say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm tired, I didn't get much sleep last night, or I don't know what's going on, maybe I'm getting sick. You could easily say that, right? Because it's true, one, and number two, it's a perfectly acceptable reason, but for some reason, you don't think it is. You think that being tired is a bad thing, and nobody's going to understand that, why are you tired? Did you not get enough sleep? That's so wrong. That nobody's going to think that. That's just crazy. That's crazy. So anyway, back to what the perception of outside of work. So at work, again, you were expected to do your job, you know what to talk about, you don't feel pressure to be interesting or talk a lot or keep the conversation going, and you think being busy or some other work type related is a good reason or an acceptable excuse for not interacting or getting out of an interaction or not being interesting and stuff like that. Outside of work, there is no clear expectation of what you should do, how you should act, where you should be, and all that stuff. You don't really know. There's some general social norms, but some people act differently depending on where they are and who they're with, and you are trying to fit in to that expectation, right? And so you don't know how they are in this social situation. You don't really know. You've never been in this type of social situation before. You've never done this before with these people at this time, and you don't really know what you should do, how you should act, where you should be. So that alone, right there, thinking that you have to act a certain way, that you should do a certain thing, that you don't know how to be a good person, how to be a good host, that you don't know how to do all that stuff. That's what the fact that you think you need to fit into this role now that you're not comfortable with, that's the whole thing. Thinking that you need to be something that you're not, and that's where that not trusting yourself, knowing that you do know what to do, how you should act, where you should be. You know it because you're just going to be yourself, and that's good enough. Like I said with the self-acceptance thing last week, right? The next thing is that you're free to talk about anything, and when the topic can be anything, it's difficult for people with social anxiety to pick the right topic, because what the frick do you talk about? Like, okay, there's a million things you can talk about. There's so many choices, and the fact that there's so many choices means you have to sort of process and think about which choice, what would be the right thing to say right now that would be interesting and would make me likable and that they want to talk about, right? So, and the whole choosing that when there's a million things to talk about and trying to analyze and figure out what you should say, what topic you should pick, that is just a daunting task. And so, when in doubt, pick anything. And the reason, like, you think you have to be interesting and likable, right? But then you have to make small talk, which is boring and pointless. So that's a topic in and of itself, right? You have to find topics for small talk, like the weather, or how their kids are doing, or some other thing, or how they're doing, or what their life is like lately, if anything interesting happened. And since that might seem, if you're like me, that is boring and pointless to you, but it's a topic, right? And if you think that topic is boring and pointless, you think the other person thinks that you're boring if you choose that topic, and so you do not make small talk. You do not pick a topic related to small talk either, because you think that that topic would make the other person think that you're boring, that you don't know why am I talking to this person? When in reality, all you gotta do is literally say something that, might seem boring and pointless to you, but if it's about them, if you're asking them a question, if you're talking about them, how are you doing? What exciting... Notice how every single question I asked before was all about them, right? It's not about you, it's about them. And if you make it about them, no matter how boring and pointless it is to you, if you make it about them, they're gonna think you're interesting. Just because you think it's boring does not mean the other person thinks that you're boring, okay? And first, this is a side note, but if you think it's boring, and the other person, for some reason, let's just say they think it's boring too, they're not going to think you're boring. They're going to think the conversation is boring. And they're going to think of ways to either make it more exciting or to stop talking. But not to stop talking in order to stop talking to you, to stop the boringness of the conversation itself. You see, you think that small talk itself is boring, so why would somebody else, if they're like you and me, and they don't like small talk either, why would somebody else think that, oh God, now we gotta make small talk, the other person here is thinking this, now I gotta make small talk, and they're boring. Like, it doesn't make any sense because they think that the small talk itself, just like you do, just like I do, they think small talk itself is the boring thing, not you. They understand that everybody makes small talk. That's just how it is. They don't think it's not you being boring. It is the small talk itself. But again, if you make it about them and not about the weather, don't make it about the weather, make it about them. How are you doing? What did you think of the weather yesterday? You can make it about the weather, but make it in terms of what they think about the weather. What did you think about the weather yesterday? Not, oh wow, it was really rainy yesterday, huh? That's stupid. That is boring. That is boring. But when you ask them a question about how something going on in their life or how they perceive something that happened to everybody, like the weather or, I don't know, Donald Trump getting elected, I don't know, if you do any of that stuff, like in relation to what they think about something, how they see something, how they feel, what their life is like, then it cannot be boring to them. Small talk is only boring to them if it's not about them, if it's about just the weather in general. If you just say a statement that has no substance. But if you ask a question and you might not care about the answer, you might think their answer is, you might think it's boring to ask the question, but they won't think it's boring. Does this all make sense? Okay, so back to why you can be fine at work, but have social anxiety with those same people outside of work. It's because your perception of being social is different, right? Again, at work, you know what to talk about. You don't feel pressure to be interesting or talk a lot. You think being busy or some other work-related thing is an acceptable excuse or an acceptable reason for not interacting or getting out of interaction. And for some reason, in this case, Diane, you think that being tired wasn't a good enough reason to be tired, like to not be able to be fully present and be fully aware and fully engaged in the conversation, even though it is, and you could have just said that and people would have been like, okay, that makes sense. And then also outside of work, no clear expectation, how you should act, where you should be, what you should do, and so you try to fit in, you try to gauge what the other people expect of you and try to fit into that mold, which is completely wrong. You should just trust yourself that you'll know what to do, that who you are and what you are and just the way you are always as a human being is good enough in any social situation, and that you know how to act and what you should do and where you should be, that you don't have to think about it. You're also free to talk about anything. Again, when the topic can be anything, it's difficult to pick the right topic, mostly because you think that it's boring when it's probably not. In the case of small talk, if you make it around them, and you think you have to be interesting and likable, which when you think you're being boring, just, obviously makes it worse. Like, this all forms together. And the whole thing is how you think about these things. If you think that small talk makes you boring, then that's the reality. But hey, how do you, you don't know what other people's realities are. And you think that your reality is also everybody else's reality, but it's not. It's not. Okay? Do you know why people don't have social anxiety? It's because their reality, their perception of the world is different. Their entire perception of what it means to make small talk, of what it means to be likable, to be interesting, of what it means to be themselves, of how they see themselves, it's all completely different, and that is why they don't have social anxiety. So let me put it this way. The way you think, if there is a thought, a belief that you hold in your mind that causes your social anxiety, that you think is how everybody sees it, then think about the fact that that literally can't be true, because if it were true, then everybody else would have social anxiety. Does this make sense? Everybody in the world would have social anxiety if they perceived the world talking to people themselves. If they perceived all that like you did, or even one of the beliefs, they would have some form, everybody in the world would have some form of social anxiety. But they don't. Which means that your perception, the way you're thinking about this, the way you think that that you're boring, that small talk is boring, that you're not good at talking because, you can't pick up a topic, or every topic you think of is boring, or you can't think of a reply, or your replies are too short. All of that is not is not how the world really works. It's not what reality really is. The proof being that everybody else is fine. Everybody else doesn't have social anxiety. The people that don't have social anxiety do not see the world like that. They don't see reality like that. And I guarantee you there are people who have zero social skills, who don't even worry about what people think of them, and their form of small talk is, yo, what's up? And then the other person goes, hey. And then, all right, peace. And then they're fine, right? That's a 3-word conversation. And neither of those people have social anxiety. Even though even though apparently how people with social anxiety would see that is, wow, they suck at talking. That was boring. But those two people don't have social anxiety. They didn't think it was boring. They didn't think it was weird. They thought it was normal. Why? Because they don't have social anxiety. Is this making sense? Okay, I'm spending a bit more time on this than I wanted to, but I got on I think a pretty good point. Let me know what you think of this. All right?